From the United Nations Office to the African Union, this is She Stands for Peace, a podcast series where I explore the state of the women, peace, and security agenda in Africa through a series of conversations with key actors. In the podcast, we ask the central question: 20 years after UNSCR 1325, how far have we come? I am Dr. Eziakonwa, your host, and today I'm joined by Ahunna Eziakonwa, Regional Director and Assistant Secretary General for UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa. Ahunna Eziakonwa joins me from New York, and we have a conversation about development, reconstruction, and peacebuilding. Miss Ahunna Eziakonwa, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Now, you lead UNDP's work across 46 countries in Africa with a mandate to support the achievement of the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. So I would suggest to you that you are a prime example of African women who are leading the development on the continent. So what has it been like for you in this prominent position working to address the wide-ranging issues that affect the continent?
Thank you so much, Yemisi, for having me. First of all, I would say that it's been a privilege and also an honor to be in this position. I don't take it for granted, particularly at this time in our world. But when I reflect on what it's been like, I would say it's been a bittersweet experience. I started off in 2018 at a time when one could say that Africa was on a solid path to its development progress. And things were really going well on the continent, many parts of the continent, double-digit growth in some countries. We saw the emergence of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the emergence of youth industrialists, the whole digital development coming through on the continent. And Africa increasingly looked at as a serious investment destination. So this was, so I started on that high note of saying now we have a next generation UNDP under the current administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner, which was going to accompany this promise on the continent. And then, of course, in 2019, COVID-19 hit. And this is where the sort of bitter experience comes in, because we started to see the setback in some of the gains that had been made, with Africa affected on the socioeconomic side. I have to say the continent did extremely well in protecting the population and keeping the pandemic at bay in terms of its health impact. But because this was a global pandemic, the impact on the socioeconomic side could not, Africa did not escape that. So we have struggled with, of course, continuing that development progress and that track record that the continent achieved in the pandemic context. So that's been devastating, just to see how much we've been slowed down by this pandemic.
Now, it's interesting you brought up youth development earlier on, because you're the brains behind the African Young Women Leaders Fellowship Program, which is a collaboration between UNDP and the AU to develop the next generation of young African women leaders and experts. And it's another excellent example of building the capacity of young people, particularly young women, to be part of that development effort in the continent, especially at this time in a COVID-19 world where certain gaps in our development has emerged. So when you reflect on how the program on African young women leaders has been, what can you share with the listeners, with our member states, about how they might approach intergenerational participation towards reconstruction and peace building in their country, especially as a continent that has the world's youngest population?
We are incredibly proud of this program at UNDP that we have collaborated with the African Union to initiate this. We're living in a world where, I mean, you're a young person. We were all young at one point. And you recall going to look for jobs and everyone asking you for experience, years and years of experience. And we generally screen out talented young people on the basis of this traditional concept of you must have X number of years of experience to be admitted into the club. And I think this has impoverished our workforce and our workplace because we are literally losing talent and this opportunity to create the intergenerational magic that is actually required for us to advance vibrancy in the workplace. And I think in the United Nations, we have the same issues. And when I looked at our situation in terms of diversity, the fact that, most of the people who then get jobs at the UN are not in that bracket of quite young and for this reason. So the program turns this thing on its head, and actually the qualification, your eligibility comes from the fewer years of experience you have, the more eligible you are for this program. So it's probably the only job opportunity that requires less experience as an eligibility criteria. And I think what we wanted to achieve here is not only create the opportunity for young women in Africa who would otherwise not have this entry level access to come in and gain experience and be set in life for leadership. Leadership not only in their countries, but also global leadership. Let's look at the United Nations today as the answer to issues of inequality, of environment, how we preserve our planet. And I still feel this organization is the world's best chance to revive multilateralism and create inclusive and equitable societies. But we can't do that unless we have a diverse workforce. This is our contribution to grooming that next generation of young leaders. We can't do it, hear me see, with just one gender ruling the world, right? We'll see how devastating that has been in the area of governance. And we need to find ways to promote gender parity in how the world is led. So for us, it's been really exciting to have the first cohort of these young women, 21 of them, demonstrate their brilliance and also teach us a lot. I've learned an incredible lot from them, especially on how to be a network. I watch them support each other through this COVID year because they were all in the same boat of having to wrestle with a new world context that they did not anticipate. But how they bonded, how they came together and created such a supportive environment for each other, mentoring each other was just incredible to see.
Absolutely. And if there was an approach that you would like to see more African member states take to facilitate such intergenerational dialogue and engagement, what would that be?
Well, first of all, I think that governments the world over, and but particularly in Africa, need to recognize the value of youth. I mean, as you said, this is a young continent, and they are in the majority. And we're projecting that by 2030, 42% of young people will be in Africa. That's huge. And how is Africa leveraging this? The people, the youth are the biggest resource the continent has, not the natural resources. This is number one resource that we have. So the first thing is to invest in youth. Invest in them, not just in terms of let's train them up and let's teach them up. Yes, that's important. But if you ask me today, young Africans are over empowered and underinvested. And I think that's the next step. They are much more educated, much more enlightened, much more connected. Uh, in their hands, they see face to face, close up, promise and opportunity because they're connected to the world and they see possibility. So, they can make their own inspiration, they can choose their own role models at home and abroad, and so they are such a resource for the continent's development and for the future of development that we need to invest in them differently, not handouts, not just things that one does for them, but actually bring them in the room at the table to make their own contributions. We only have to look at startups today in the technology world to see who dominates that space. It's young people. If they were without value, experience, or contribution, you wouldn't be seeing that. And this was demonstrated to us throughout the pandemic in terms of how Africa curated homegrown solutions to tackle COVID 19.
Now, talking about the way we do development, as you said, each year the UNDP produces the Human Development Index, and that shows a series of indicators and ranking of countries based on things like life expectancy, education, and per capita income. And in 2020, UNDP introduced a new approach to measuring human progress, and one that considers environment issues and inequalities. So tell us about this new approach and how important it is for real development on the continent.
No, I think it is the fact that we look at people, planet, and prosperity, right? And we have to do development in a way that preserves the planet. And back to the topic of youth, they are keenly interested in this, and I believe that this generation will drive the development that is more sustainable, that is done more smartly, that is greener, because they have a stake, a huge stake in making sure. I mean, they're going to be here a lot longer than most of us. So they have a huge stake in making sure that there is still such a thing as planet Earth to live on. So the more we need to integrate youth in the process of development so that we're talking about development that is much more sustainable, that takes into account climate change, and that uses new technologies to get us there faster but greener. So I feel that we have an opportunity today to leapfrog, yes, to do things differently. We have renewable energy, for instance, in the area of energy, which is literally untapped in the context of Africa. So invest in that, and we can cut out a lot of damage that is being done through the use of fossil fuel for living. So decarbonized kind of development trajectories, development pathways is possible today because the technology exists. But one would need to invest heavily in that. And this is where global solidarity, global action, that collective effort is important because Africa alone cannot undertake that journey. Africa is a very insignificant emitter of carbon, but it bears a huge brunt of the impact of climate change.
You mentioned technology earlier on and youth, and that as part of a wider development effort on the continent. Now, UNDP recently set up a technical advisory group of tech experts, technology experts, to build on its Africa Leading the Fourth Industry Revolution initiative. Tell us about that initiative.
We've had the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, and one would say that these probably Africa was left behind in all of this. And until the arrival of the fourth industrial revolution, which we believe is being led by Africa today. If you think about the innovations in fintech, for instance, for many years, decades, development assistance tried to bank the poor, and it was an uphill battle. And today you have a technology intervention that literally drew 90% of the population into the mainstream of financial transactions and financial literacy. This didn't happen anywhere else in the world but in Africa. The M-Pesa, as we call it in Kenya, was leading that trail. And then, of course, followed by countries like Zimbabwe with Eco Cash. The whole promise of digital technology as an enabler of development, you could say that was sort of demonstrated on the continent of Africa. And that's why we are really very keen to mine this gold for as we try to accelerate development, right? So the Fourth Industrial Revolution initiative that we're pioneering in the UNDP Africa sees this opportunity to bring together, convene the top leaders in this field on the continent to really begin to look at how to position the continent as a leader in this area, a global leader, but also on the continent to look at how it can influence how we do development, edtech, agrotech, fintech, health tech. Practically all of it can be transformed, not overnight, but a lot faster if we apply the new digital technologies. The proof of concept is already there in a lot of these areas. We know, for instance, the importance of agriculture in reducing poverty and perhaps ending poverty on the continent. But we also know that that sector has been so traditional in its expression that it has not delivered for people and for the economy as much as it could. So apply new technologies and see how much further we can get. COVID 19 has laid bare the deficiencies in the health system and how, but at the same time, it has revealed to us the possibilities in having more inclusive, more equitable services in the health sector through digital health, for instance. Education is another one where we see glaring disparities in learning based on where you live, who you were, what family you were born to, what country you live in. Can technology change all of that? That young people learning in the most remote areas where you will not be able to transport the best teachers in science to teach them could receive the same quality of education as anyone in any other part of the continent or the country that is more advanced, because you're able to stream that education possibility to those communities through technology. So the possibilities are immense, but the challenges are also quite tall. And that's why this group is important and the initiative is important, because we want to start to, on one hand, reveal what possibilities and potential is there. On the other hand, also create a momentum in closing the gap in terms of the challenges that this faces.
I want to expand a little bit more on those gaps and challenges because in this time, building back better is the current mantra that we're hearing as the world prepares itself for life with COVID 19 and addressing the gaps that the pandemic exposes. And in terms of peace and security, one aspect that relates to emerging technologies is inclusion of women and girls and its use for furthering the women, peace, and security agenda. Unfortunately, though, as you said, there are still huge gaps, for example, in terms of infrastructure, education, and even the participation of women and girls in the production of technology. So, them being part of the industry, the STEM industry. But there are lots of positives too, and the many creative ways technology has been used for peace building and mediation during the pandemic demonstrate this. So, within the context of building back better, and reconstruction and peace building, what would you like to see member states and indeed your initiative doing to address the various layers of gendered gaps in digital inclusion?
Or has to start really early. I mean, STEM for Girls is a huge initiative. Several UN agencies are involved in that, and we're also collaborating now everywhere in the world. We need to address this gap by making sure that, again, it's about opportunity. It's not about brain power. The girls have the brain power, just like the boys. They just don't have the opportunity. So, first of all, making sure that girls stay in school, right? Because that's the structure within which the learning takes place and all the effort. And this is where your expression of, we say building forward better is important, because we know that the pandemic, the world through the MDGs really did make progress in girl enrollment in schools, making sure that girls stay in schools, they enroll and that they stay in schools. But who got affected when the hardship came through COVID-19? It's the girls. Once the families are not able to cope, the girls pay the price. They are taken out of school to earn income for the families, and some of them never get to go back, right? So we started in the UN system a strategy to ensure that during lockdowns, for instance, that vast majority of kids, but particularly girls, could continue learning. And everything under the sun was used: radios, TV, whatever one could lay hands on. And I have to really give it to the educators out there and some of the organizations who focused on this, because a year and a half of no schooling for girls means basically, they head to marriage, right? It's like escape uh, from the whole education system. So we could see major losses there, but I think we have time to catch up, again, through technology. But when it comes to STEM and making sure that we also have the girls as part of this, I really think it's important, first of all, to make sure they stay in school. Secondly, that every effort, every curriculum is putting that extra effort to make sure that the girls are involved, they're exposed to the new technologies, and that they are equipped. And thirdly, I think infrastructure, you mentioned it. We know that those who are most disadvantaged are also those who don't have easy access, either to energy or to infrastructure. You need energy for technology. So it's really important that countries focus on energy access and affordable energy for all. That's so critical, because without affordable, accessible energy, it's very difficult to do what you're saying, And right now, we know that it's still only a small percentage that have access. So those who don't have access will not have the opportunity to be in the room on that science and technology journey. There are many things to lift: the infrastructure, the energy, I think what we call infrastructure, which is making sure that the broadband is installed in many of these places, and that it becomes affordable to the poorest families. I think, Yemisi, one of the things that we are finding is with the new technologies, it's quite incredible, this generation, the younger generation, whether they're in the villages or in the towns. I mean, I've myself come in contact with kids from very poor backgrounds who've never even been to the capitals of their countries, being able to innovate from where they are, which means that they have a natural sort of flair for this. This is just their age. This is their time, and what is needed to trigger their participation. It's not that huge, and it's not insurmountable.
Thank you so much, Miss Ahunna Eziakonwa. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. So now we've talked about your work and your professional background and all the amazing work that you've been doing in development. So to end the interview, can you tell us something interesting about you that people won't find on Google?
That is a trick question. Well, let's say in my previous life, I enjoyed theater very much. I did quite a bit of acting, not professionally, but as a kind of a way of starting life and learning. This was in my 20s. I was part of what was called the Westminster Theatre that fostered education in theater. and travel to India and other places, acting on stage and enabling discussions with drama. So I'm kind of, and I've written a play myself, a couple actually, uh, which were featured internationally. Because I love to tell stories. I'm a bit of a storyteller, and that idea of really understanding human nature and human relationship through storytelling is something that's always appealed to me, and which is why I'm very keen on the creative industry.
Oh, that's great. And we have that in common actually, because my dream when I was a child was to win an Oscar. I wanted to be an actress. And, I did theater arts at the
Oh
university as
well.
well. And yeah, so, and I wrote a play as well, though, I mean, that's in my cupboard. I never shared that with anybody. Thank you so much for doing the interview. You have been listening to She Stands for Peace, the podcast series that explores the state of the women, peace, and security agenda in Africa, asking the central question 20 years after UN SCR 1325, how far have we come? I'm Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, your host, and this podcast was produced by the United Nations Office to the African Union with the generous support of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs.